So let's begin at the beginning at the top with the end in mind. Here are some critical things that we'd like for you to bear in mind as you think about the decision that we're going to ask the client to make. As you actually articulate the end in mind in front of your client in the meeting, it's going to be pretty clear that we're going to be asking the client to make a decision. The best ends in mind are singular. Don't have multiple ends in mind. They've got to be quite singular. And they've got to allow for this choice between yes or no. So the client doesn't feel painted into a corner. Both yes and no with regards to the end in mind are perfectly acceptable. To your point, it's got to be very client-centric. It has to benefit them first. And then it's got to be logical and realistic and appropriate for where they're at in their internal decision-making process. So with those parameters around the end in mind, let me give you some examples of what we might consider good ends in mind. Towards the beginning of the sales cycle, a good end in mind for this meeting might be, should we keep on talking? Do other stakeholders need to be involved in what we're talking about? Would you mind introducing us to other stakeholders? And you'll notice that early on in the sales cycle, I phrase those ends in mind more as questions because we want to be a lot more exploratory. Later on in the sales cycle, maybe our ends in mind are a little bit more affirmative. We want you to decide today to allocate resources for this project. We want you to confirm the priority of this opportunity. Decide to conduct a feasibility study. So they're more affirmative. So there are some examples of ends in mind. What I'd like for you to do is just concentrate on that part in your call plan. And could you write down there, now that you've seen some examples, could you write down here what you think would be an effective end in mind for the meeting that you've identified? Yes, sir.
Question, is that one end in mind? Should you focus on just one primary end in line, or are we talking two or three, or what are you looking for?
Yeah, the general rule of thumb, it's a great question. The general rule of thumb is that we want these ends in mind to be quite singular. What's the next base camp that we have to arrive at before we go too far up, planning up the mountain? Because things happen, right? Weather changes, terrain changes, things happen. So just in order to get to the next base camp, what would be the end in mind? Yeah. So let's hear some ends in mind. Well, what I'm going to ask a couple of people to do is share their ends in mind, and then collectively, let's think about those ends in mind in terms of these parameters that we have up here on the screen. So, Monique, I think you said you might like to share your end in mind.
Sure. Mine is, do other stakeholders need to be involved?
Do other stakeholders need to be involved? That's the decision that we're asking the client to make in this particular meeting that you're preparing for. So, as an end in mind, what do we think? Does it require a decision? Absolutely it does. Is it singular? Absolutely. It's very compact, isn't it? Does it offer a yes or a no? Yeah, and maybe in the way that we phrase that, we might be a little more explicit with that. We might say to the client when you actually say it in the meeting, we would like for you to decide whether or not you're willing to. Yeah. Is it client-centric? And appropriate and realistic for where you are in the sales cycle? There you go. So can you see this is sort of feedback that we want to give one another in terms of those key parameters. Let's just do one more. Houdini, I think you were going to share.
Sure. So mine is the decision to have a more secure SharePoint environment important to you?
So you want the client to tell you whether or not they feel that having a more secure environment is important.
Correct.
Okay. So once again, does it require a decision? Singular? Absolutely, yeah. Yes or no, as long as you use that sort of language, right? Whether or not you think it's important, that gives the option of the yes or no. Client-centric? It's all about their security, isn't it? Yeah. Realistic and appropriate for where you are in the selling cycle? Yeah. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do as I get you with your partners right now. Give one another very specific feedback on these particular points right here. Don't just say, oh yeah, that sounds kind of good. Actually offer some constructive feedback along those lines right there. So as you got a little bit of coaching on that on the item that we call end in mind, what sort of things did you notice or observe in what you wrote down or what your partner wrote down? Yes, sir.
That both of them were questions.
Say that again?
Both of them were questions with yes/no answers.
Yeah, very good. So it kind of keeps things open. Yeah, the client doesn't feel painted into a corner. Yeah, very good. What else did you notice?
Depending on the stage that you're in with the opportunity, it may be difficult to make it client-centric because you may still be exploring a lot of things and trying to gain information so that you can then go back and make it more client-centric.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you're it's a great point. When you're very early on like that, and then in mind might be, would you be willing to share information with us? That would be a good end in mind. It would advance the deal a little bit, I mean, to the next base camp. Anything else that you noticed? All right, we think this end in mind concept is hugely powerful. How often do we go into meetings without having an end in mind clearly established? How often do we go into meetings with someone else from our company and the two of us on our side are not clear on the end in mind? So can you imagine how confusing it's going to be for the client in that meeting? If you have a strong end in mind, it's so much easier now to determine what you include into the rest of the preparation for this particular meeting.
Just had a thought on the end in mind. It does seem like it'd be important for you and the client prior to the meeting to have the same understanding of the end in mind. Because I think, one of the things that I was thinking about is backing off and, making sure the end in mind is realistic, but you might underwhelm the client if you go in with too low of a bar and they're expecting more, if they bring in high-level people because they think they're going to make a different decision than you're planning. So that was just a thought I had in terms of making sure that you have the right kind of success.
Absolutely. I think, and this is a judgment that we make. We don't want to be so unrealistic that we establish an end in mind that is clearly not appropriate for this particular meeting where we're at. At the same time, as client engagement people, we have to move the needle, right? How many meetings do we attend where it's just meeting after meeting after meeting after a lot of sharing of information, a lot of good sort of fuzzy, warm feeling between us? The thing is that we're not advancing the deal. So it's got to be aggressive enough to actually push things forward without it being realistic. And that, I think, is probably a judgment that we make. Yeah, and we'll get more into that as we think about preconditioning. How do we precondition if the end in mind is acceptable, or are they expecting something a little bolder? Yeah. Yes, sir.
What about the concept of going into the end in mind and having that change during the course of the conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. Have you noticed for all the planning that we do, we cannot behave like robots in front of a client. And if all of a sudden the client has to go over here on this tangent because it's important to them to go over there, at least we know that that is a conscious choice that we're all making in the meeting. We just didn't drift there. We're actually making a conscious choice to change the end in mind because this other stuff over here is more important today for the client.
I'm very conscious about making sure an agenda goes out and a meeting invite with my end in mind and getting agreement on that in advance. So I'm furthering, the conversation through doing that, but then also they make sure the right people are in the room and if they want to modify it, they have plenty of time to do so. Yes.
And once again, I think that goes to this idea of preconditioning. Can you see how important preconditioning is? To test out the end in mind. And is it appropriate? Is it soft? Is it hard? Yeah, we'll pick up on that. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, so let me carry on with you now. This whole topic of preconditioning has already been mentioned a couple of times. Preconditioning is not sort of a nice to have. It's really how we begin to set up the successful meeting. If I could ask you once again to watch this video in your learning journal, write down the things that seem to be resonating for you, and then I'll ask you, what did you notice, what did you observe in terms of this topic that we call preconditioning?
Let's return to Ben. He realizes that a well-thought-out call plan increases the probability of conducting a very successful meeting. Like in mountain climbing, he's learned that Pareto's 80-20 rule applies here. It takes 80% preparation and about 20% execution to create decision-making meetings. And a critical part of the preparation is preconditioning, with clients before the meeting. Preconditioning is testing the approach to the meeting and gaining the client's agreement to the end in mind and key beliefs before the meeting happens. It also allows him to invite the client's input so that he and the client can come prepared with relevant information, gather data, and appropriately include people that will be necessary to arrive at the end-in-mind decision. He has learned that preconditioning allows him to maximize his effectiveness during the meeting around the 4 rights. We want to talk about the right issues for the right amount of time with the right people to arrive at the right end-in-mind decision. As he preconditions around the 4 rights, he is careful to share responsibility for achieving the end in mind with the client. Just as his clients expect him to provide value, in the spirit of partnership, he requests that they arrive with value to share as well. The more we precondition their investment in the meeting, the more effectively we work together to produce intelligent outcomes. Ben is adamant with his sales team. Preconditioning is not an optional nice to have. It's not something to do if we happen to remember. It is mandatory for success. In his presentation, he states the end-in-mind decision up front and spends the rest of the time addressing the key beliefs. Preconditioning is the necessary bridge between preparing the call plan and executing the call plan successfully. With that bridge established, we arrive at the meeting where the environment is already warm. Expectations are clear, and once again, we accelerate speed to value.
The rest of the preparation really revolves around this topic that we call key beliefs. The key beliefs are those stepping stones or those base camps that we have to establish such that eventually we can get to the end in mind for today. And remember, the whole idea is making incremental decisions, not one huge decision, it's making incremental decisions. So what are those small decisions that the client is going to have to make during the course of this meeting in order to comfortably arrive at the end in mind? All right, so if I could ask you to take a look now at this video that we call Key Beliefs. These items, these topics that the client has to be able to adopt in order to arrive comfortably at the end in mind. And once again, in your learning journal, if I could ask you to write down the things that seem to be resonating, things that seem to be eye-opening for you. Here we go.
Once we know the end-in-mind decision, we can identify the steps to get there during the meeting. Research on decision-making reveals that people make decisions based on beliefs, not facts. We then choose facts to support our beliefs. Your job is to anticipate what the client's beliefs are. We refer to these as key beliefs. Key beliefs are the 3 or 4 critical things the client must believe, intellectually or emotionally, in order to confidently and comfortably make the end-in-mind decision. Here are some helpful guidelines for organizing key beliefs. Include nothing extra. Chunk it down. Keep it to a few. And link to the end in mind. First of all, nothing extra. We want to give them only what they need to make the decision at hand in the meeting. Nothing less, nothing more. More information than what is necessary for the decision wastes valuable time and potentially confuses the client. It risks introducing doubts and objections. Second, chunk it down. Asking clients to take one big leap at the end of a meeting is risky. Instead, give them several comfortable steps throughout the meeting. This makes traversing a mountain or a meeting easier and more enjoyable. It also keeps the client from falling into the abyss of information overload. Third, keep it to a few. The general rule is to have between 3 or 4 key beliefs. Stay concise. Link to the end in mind. Each key belief allows the client to answer some question or come to some conclusion that directly relates to the decision at hand. Allow the client to keep checking things off as they go, rather than wait and put it all together at the end. We enable decision-making when we are skillful at linking the client's key beliefs to the end-in-mind decision.
So if I could ask you, what did you notice? What did you observe? What resonated for you in that video on key beliefs? Yeah.
Giving 3 or 4 steps instead of just one big decision.
There you go. Yeah, so this whole idea of sort of incremental decision making. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
The concept of nothing extra. I think when we try so hard, we provide more than is necessary and end up confusing the client and wasting everybody's time.
Yeah, and it goes to the importance of the end in mind. Would you
Yes.
agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Because if you have a strong end in mind, you know what to include into the meeting. And more importantly, to your point, you know what to exclude from the meeting. Nothing extra.
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Yes, sir.
Yes, just the nothing extra part, because we tend to want to show our credentials by showing how much we know. And so it's very important to take something out. That's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other things that you notice as we looked at that video? Yeah.
Just the ability to be able to link every step along the way and kind of back to the customer. So as you're giving them this information, they're linking it back to him, enabling him to make a decision.
Exactly, yes. So each key belief has to have some sort of sequence attached to it, so they're all linked. And all of these key beliefs, anyway, are linked to the end in mind at the end of the meeting that we're going to the decision that we're going to ask them to make. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I've found that salespeople have the tendency to, spray and pray. They throw out as much facts and figures as they can. I think this concept of the key belief, the emotional conviction, is something good, something different.
Yes. Yeah, once again, it goes to the lack of, when that happens, it goes to the lack of a strong end in mind. Because people don't know what to say or what to include in the presentation. Just in case, they'll include everything, spray and pray that something will stick. Yeah. One of the biggest barriers to being able to demonstrate good intent, we're going to suggest to you, is the need that we feel to talk about our solutions prematurely. Our solutions are valuable, and they will be valuable to the client only if they're relevant to the client. So what I'd like to introduce you to this concept that we call move off the solution. And once again, as you watch this video, as you think about your intent and some of the barriers that attack our good intent, could you write down in your learning journal things that seem to be resonating? Then we'll do the same exercise. At tables, we'll share a couple of things, and then collectively as a room, share those things that seem to be resonating for us. Okay, here we go.
A clear intent to create success for others first will unlock an exchange of information. The skill set, move off the solution, helps you to move the conversation away from us and our needs towards what is important for the client. Early in his career, Ben's typical sales calls tended to emphasize his company, his experience, his credentials, and his solutions. He believed if he talked enough, he could convince them to buy. He learned that he tended to cut short the critical discovery dialogue that identifies the client's real issues and motivators. Qualifying and forecasting was a problem for him when he was doing most, if not all, the talking. Any solution, all by itself, has no inherent value. Solutions only create value when they solve problems that people have or create results that people want. Let's say, for instance, I was selling the world's absolutely best lawnmower. It had every feature and benefit you could possibly imagine, yet it was extremely easy to use and affordable. Wouldn't you want this wonderful lawnmower? But what if your yard was a beautiful Zen garden, exquisitely raked fine sand, and several elegantly placed rocks bordered by small, smooth stones? Would my lawnmower be a great solution for you? Would it solve any problems or produce any results that you're desiring? Would it help if I told you more about its features? How about if I lowered the price? Did you know we do Saturday deliveries? Did I tell you about the lifetime guarantee? The goal of moving off the solution is to have the client start talking about the problems or results they're hoping the solution will resolve. Let me introduce you to a simple process for moving off the solution. There are 3 parts. First, listen carefully to what the client asks you. Second, use a softening and clarifying statement. The softening statement is a transition from the client's question to your response. It is designed to assure the client that you're going to answer their question. Clarifying statements ensure that we aren't guessing about what they're asking us. Third, ask a move off the solution question. We want to shift the conversation from you talking about your products and services and more towards mutual exploration. Remember, we want the focus to be on the client. Let us demonstrate this for you in a quick role play.
Dave, I'm glad you're here today. We've adopted a global growth strategy for our retail organization, and to facilitate the growth that we're looking at, to get at the pace and the speed that we need to get our different financial systems and processes in alignment. And we hear that your organization is really good at this, so I'd love to just understand, what do you do and how do you go about making this kind of change?
Yeah, happy to share, Scott. We actually do have quite a bit of experience in this area, particularly in the financial systems and processes arena. And for an organization like yours, given the mergers and acquisitions that your company's been through, I can see how that would be pretty important. What I'd like to do is describe for you the process, the approach that you can take. And before I dive into all of that, let me just pause for a minute and ask a couple of questions. In order for me to make my comments more relevant, what are some of the key business results you think you'd be able to achieve if you were able to merge, to combine all of these financial systems and processes?
Well, there are several that we're absolutely mandated to get after. The first one is we have to change our...
While Dave could have gone on and on about his company and services, he chose to shift the conversation back to the client, where the client shares information about his situation and needs. This makes it easier for us to speak in a relevant way about how we can help the client. If you do this well, the rest of the qualification conversation should roll out logically and naturally. If you don't move off the solution, or if you do it poorly, you'll likely spend most of your initial client dialogue talking about your solution. The clients will ask you questions. You will do all the work, and by the end of the conversation, you will have little understanding of what's important to the client.
So we're going to spend quite a lot of time on this move off the solution skill. We're going to suggest that if you get this right, as from this point, you have an entirely different conversation. And because you're having an entirely different conversation, you have entirely different relationships too. The point of departure to actually get somebody willing to move off a solution with you is, once again, your intent. If that is not clear, if that is not authentic, to use your word, nobody's going to want to move in a direction that they're not willing to move in. All right, so now that we've revisited the whole item, the basis for all of this is good intent. Let's get a little bit, take a deeper dive into move off the solution. First of all, listen. Listen with an open mind. Be very objective. Allow for the client to do most of the talking. We do most of the absorbing, seeking to understand first. And then the softening statement. This is the capability to sort of hold what the client said, not judge it, not criticize it or think you've got to add to it. It's just to hold what the client said. It also, the softening statement, earns you the right to begin to move the conversation in a different direction. Would you agree we earn the right to do things? All of that is happening in the softening statement. And then you've got to clarify to really understand what the client is talking about. And is my interpretation of what you just said correct and in alignment with what you believe to be true? Let me just try this out, this whole clarifying thing. Is it possible that we misinterpret things sometimes? or more often than not. Yeah, I'm just going to shout out a word to you. On the count of 3, I'm going to shout out a word to you, and I want you to spontaneously give me a definition of that word from your point of view. All right, are you ready for that? Don't overthink this. I want you to shout out as loudly as possible a definition or something that has to do with the concept that the word that I'm going to give you. Are you ready? On the count of 3? 1, 2, 3. Dog.
Cat.
Man's best friend.
Can you see how important clarifying is going to be? I mean, we can't even get dog right. Shall we do something complicated now? It's really important to get aligned with the definition of the client such that then we earn the right to do the move. This is where you get hold of the client's shoulders and you move them in a different direction. So, the softening and the clarifying statements earn the right to ask questions. We transition from the client's statement to a question that's going to actually generate a different type of conversation. Throughout all of that, we're actually generating increased understanding. Now, this move, because we call this skill move off the solution, right? It's a conscious move towards business problems to solve and or business results to generate. It's a conscious move in that direction. So we might say something like, what types of business problems are leading you to believe that you need to go in this direction? And if you could go in this direction successfully, what types of business results would you be able to achieve? So we're moving the conversation towards more of a business dialogue. Let me introduce you to one of the first role plays that we're going to do now around this topic that we call move off the solution. And we're going to dedicate quite a lot of time to this. Could you please go to your deck of cards, if you could open those up right here, and go to deck number 1. Deck number 1. And if you could go to card number 23 of the blue cards, card number 23. You can put the other cards down for a second. Card number 23. The first 2 cards that you see on top of card 23 are just instruction and concept cards. I'm going to give you all of that verbally. They're just there for your reference later on, okay? So we go to card number 23. And what we're going to be doing is actually working on articulating move off the solution questions. So let us say, for example, let's take card number 23. On the front, we have a client statement. Can everybody see that? We're interested in outsourcing a range of business processes from finance to HR to IT. Could you help guide our thinking at a high level? So let's just say a client were to say something like that. Now, on the back of the card, there you'll have the actual articulation, what you might say in terms of putting into effect the move off the solution formula. So, Chris, would you mind just reading that the back of card 23 to us?
Sure. Salesperson response.
Yeah.
We do have lots of business process outsourcing experience, and I want to ensure the ideas we share with you are going to be relevant to your specific situation. Just a quick question, what sort of guidance would be most helpful at this stage?
There's the clarifying, right? Did you notice that? The softening statement followed by the clarifying. Carry on.
Problems. What business problems are you hoping to solve by outsourcing these processes? Results. What sorts of business results are you hoping to generate by successfully outsourcing these processes?
There we go. So once again, we want to offer you a very practical skill, a very doable skill on the phone in the meeting where you can actually generate an entirely different conversation, sort of elevate the conversation up to the business level, take it away from solution dialogue to more of a business dialogue. All right, so can you see how there's the front of the card is the client statement, the back of the card is a response that actually follows the move off the solution formula. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to get you back into pairs now. And we've already done card number 23, so put that one right at the back. Let's go to card number 25, card number 25. And let us say, for example, that Steve and I, we're partners in this exercise, okay? I'm going to be the client, and you, Steve, you're going to be the salesperson. So I would read you the client statement. We need to optimize. Can everybody see that? Okay, we need to optimize our service delivery. I know it's a broad topic, and I'd like to hear your opinion on how we should approach it. And Steve, instead of you going, oh, well, we need to approach it this way and this way, taking me towards the solution, I'm going to ask you to articulate a move off the solution response. So it might sound something like this. It might sound, well, interesting, Steve, that you just mentioned that you want to optimize service delivery, if I'm the sales guy now. There are various ways that we could approach this. Just before we go any further, how are you defining an optimized service delivery? So there's my softening statement and my clarify, right? And now that I understand what you mean by optimizing service delivery, now I do the move. And I say to him, what are some of the business problems that are driving a need to optimize service delivery? Or I could also go to results, right? And if you could, Steve, optimize service delivery effectively, what business benefits would that create for your company? Now, once we've actually articulated our response on the fly, then we look on the back and we compare what we said with what's on the back. And what's on the back is just a point of reference. It's not the right answer and the only answer. It's just a point of reference. Then we go rapidly to the next card. So we did 25. Now we go to 27, the next card, right? And now we change the roles. Now, you're the client, Steve. I'm going to be the salesperson. You read me the client statement. I come up with a move off the solution response, and then we look on the back and compare. The next card, it's your turn. The next card, it's my turn. The next card, and please go through all the blue cards in the spirit of repetition and reinforcement of the skill. Go through all the cards, taking it in turns to be client and salesperson. Is that clear what I've asked you to do? All right, I'm going to ask you please to stand up. Find someone from a different company on the opposite side of the room, it doesn't matter if you know their industry or not, and actually work through all of the cards from 25 all the way through to the end of the blue ones. All right, so there we were actually practicing this move off the solution capability with the rationale that if you get this right, you have an entirely different conversation as from this point. So before anything slips your mind, could you please go to your learning journal, and specifically with regards to the softening statement, is there anything that you want to jot down that you want to remember? Anything that sort of resonated for you specifically with the softening statement? And then with regards to clarifying, anything you want to write down there? And then with the move to problems and or the move to results. Yes, sir.
I have a question. So how do you keep this yes and the questions, clarifying questions, from appearing to be like you're stalling? Right? How do you know, what's the trigger that you know that you have asked enough of those clarifying questions and now it's either time to answer or fold? Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of art in this, isn't there? Would you agree that selling is art and science is sort of the mix of both? So there's a lot of art in this. I think I'd suggest that you've got to it's all in the softening statement first. If you're my client and I say to you, I really want to answer your question accurately and in a way that is specifically relevant to your needs. So I'm going to do that. Right? Now, in order to make my comments accurate and relevant to your needs, could you help me understand what you mean by? So I get a bit of clarification, and now I earn the right to move in a different direction. So I think it's the investment in the softening statement that allows you to not come over like you're stalling or you're kind of weaseling out of the question, which we don't want to come over like that. Yeah. So as you think about what you just wrote down, anything you'd like to share in terms of what resonated most with you as you practiced this move off the solution capability? Good. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned the softening statement. I find that I sometimes forget it and dive right into moving off the solution. You got to kind of transition to it.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I hear people, they say things like, oh, I can appreciate that. Now what we got to do is this stuff over here. That's not a softening statement, is it? It's got to be, you have to invest in it. It has to be robust enough. It's got to be authentic. It's got to have the right intent. Otherwise, it will come over as being sort of, squeamy or manipulative or inappropriate. Yeah, what else? Yeah.
Well, I viewed the softening and the clarifying statement as almost the same thing. So the softening is almost like a reinforcement that, yes, we can probably do what you're asking us to do, but let's understand a little bit better.
Yeah.
So getting that definition, and I've found it a lot of times when clients are talking, they're talking about things in very broad terms, so it's very natural to ask the questions.
Yes. To bring it down to a level of granularity that we're going to have to understand if we're going to actually give you a solution that exactly meets your needs. And I love that word probably, in your softening statement. We can probably help you. How often do we come across salespeople that say, absolutely, we can, and yeah, here we go again with the same stuff. Just by adding that word probably, we can probably help you. It's such a relief on the client side when you hear that sort of language. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I like what you said earlier about the softening statement, and you said earlier, it's salespeople, it's real hard to stop and pause and clarify. They ask you a question, and you already got a whole solution. You know it's a home run.
Yeah.
But if you can just take the time to say, to make my comments more relevant, so I understand. I love that piece because it is the art and the craft of making sure you understand it and then approach it appropriately.
Yeah, it really is. I love the art and craft, right? It is the art and craft of human engagement, really and truly.
Like what I took away from it is I think that you're validating that I heard what you asked me. I'm not just in the meeting ready to tell you everything, but I'm actively listening and then responding to that.
Yes. And we do this in a way that's, we don't have to be so overt about it. And these people that say, your success is our success, all that old-fashioned stuff, this is a way to actually demonstrate without having to say so that you really are on their side of the table first, client-centric right from the beginning. Yeah.
I think it's really important, too, that, she was saying you're validating what they're acknowledging, but you're also validating their problems and their concerns and their frustrations, and they've given you a chance to fix something that they are frustrated with. They've been open with you. So I think just validating that openness, of not just a yes or a no, but of also saying, that's a relevant problem.
Yes.
Is important.
Yeah, and it demonstrates an appreciation for their willingness to actually put something on the table for us to discuss. Yeah, very good. So, just before we go to lunch, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. In your, there are two options here. You can go to, have you noticed the last pages, 43 and 45? Write down a real client request for a solution that you got recently, or that you hear a lot. All right, and this is what I'm going to ask you to do, last exercise just before we go to lunch. I'm going to get you with a new partner. So let's say, for example, Crystal and myself are partners in this exercise. I am now going to be my client, and you're going to be the salesperson. All right? Even if you don't know my company, my industry, don't worry about that. I'm going to be my client, and I'm going to read to you, Crystal, what I just wrote down in terms of a typical client request for a solution that I seem to get a lot. Then I'm going to wait for you to actually articulate the move off the solution response. When you have done that, I'm going to compare what you said on the fly with what I wrote down here, and a little bit of compare and contrast. Did you notice you said it like this, and I wrote it down like that? And then we go in the other direction. Now it's your turn to be your client. I'm the salesperson. You read me the client statement. I articulate a move off the solution response, and then we compare what I said with what you wrote down, a little bit of compare and contrast. Is that clear what I've asked you to do? Because I really want to put this into your reality, something that you hear on a regular basis. All right, do me a favor. Stand up, find someone new from a different company, from a different table.